This ZeroNow program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
And we have three very distinguished guests today. We'll start with Chief Valdimir Talley. Hey, Val, welcome. If you wouldn't mind just giving a quick background and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Ara. My name is Valdimir Talley. I am the safety director for Decatur Public Schools, District 61. It's in Decatur, Illinois, southeast central Illinois. I was a law enforcement officer for 36 years, where I came up from the entry ranks to chief of police. And then for the last 3 years, or academic years, I have been working toward keeping schools safe as the director of the safety.
And so we're glad you could join us once again. You're on earlier this year, and so looking forward to your insights. And what's really exciting about this group here is that you've got K through 12, you've got a higher education, then you have a professional view on different types of stadiums and events and special events. In the higher education space, Joe Souza, welcome, Joe. Would you mind just providing a quick background on yourself and connection to the topic?
Thank you, Ara. So I'm Joe Souza, a career security professional. Started my career after a tour in the Air Force back 87 and 91. I started in security. Been doing physical security my whole career. My most relevant experience to this topic today is my 8 years of experience in higher education, working for two different universities, the University of Central Florida in Orlando and the University of Florida in Gainesville. Today, I'm currently the chief operating officer for a company called Serverly. We're a security solutions provider, and we certainly, everything we talk about today, we could be a resource for you, if nothing more, just for a conversation on security. And in my experience in higher ed, be glad to help out any way I can. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
I'll say thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. And Greg Overstreet from Mercedes-Benz Stadium on the pro side of things, your perspective. Welcome, Greg. Would you mind just providing a quick background on yourself?
Hey, thanks, Ara. Most people say, Greg, how come you don't have any real cool like Falcons gear or professional stuff in the background when you're doing these? But I try to stay neutral, no matter. I don't want to tick off anybody who might be a fan of another team. My name's Greg Overstreet. I was in law enforcement for 10 years. Left law enforcement, went to work at the Georgia Dome in Atlanta, which at the time was one of the newer stadiums in the NFL. Host for many events there. Worked there up until 2017 when the new Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta was built. We're the host to, of course, the NFL's Atlanta Falcons, MLS Atlanta United. We have many college football games, pretty much an entire college season there with our games, the SEC Championship and the bowl games that come in. And then we host about 4 or 5 major concerts a year. We had Taylor Swift for 3 days, Beyonce for 3 days. So quite a varied type of events that come in through our stadium.
Yeah, and had I known you were wearing your Falcons gear, I would throw my Buffalo Bills shirt on. So like the guy saw yesterday. No, so Joe, let's jump right into it. So what would you say some of the most common safety challenges are that schools face when hosting large events, that big Friday Night Lights event? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So having been a security professional my whole career and then going to higher ed, it's much different. You're dealing with big college sports, at the higher ed level. And I'm from New England originally, and everything is professional sports there. So I really had no understanding as to what a college game day was like, or a big arena event, or things like that. So I think what we see a lot, if you talk about a football game, a concert, an arena event, the challenges with tailgating, entrance security, the game itself, your opposing crowds, medical incidents that happen during the event, the post-game activities, the crowd rushing the field if it's a big upset win. So those are all concerns that you have. And by and large, these are soft targets. You can't make them bulletproof, literally or figuratively. So, larger universities and smaller ones are struggling to implement things like good entrance security with metal detection. The big schools that I worked at, UCF and UF, they were striving to get there. And the biggest challenges are they had an existing facility that lacked the external infrastructure to put the metal detection in, along with the complementary cameras and things like that. And then if you do have things like that, do you have a policy and a procedure for screening guests? If you rent equipment, do your operators know how to use it? You're talking about large areas, so football stadium might have good perimeter control, but you have heavy reliance on your vendors, your guests, your own personnel to make sure that they follow the rules for entry. You don't allow contraband in, or people aren't letting other people in through what are supposed to be secure entrances. You have to maintain situational awareness at all times, right? You have to know what's going on. And that's really challenging as you have a large event with many different agencies. So then communication really becomes the key. How do you communicate across a wide platform of different first responders, different groups within your campus environment or your organization? Do the technologies exist that they can interoperate? Or do you have radios you can hand out to all your personnel for the event itself? And then when you talk about the radio network, if you don't have a good radio network, maybe you set up your incident command or your central operations for the event where you have key personnel from your different agencies that are in partnership in that room or ICP where they can collaborate. So each independent agency will talk to their leadership, and then the leadership of all those different groups are in a room where they can quickly share information and be able to help protect the event, safety, security, medical, whatever the situation may be.
And Val, how does that differ in K through 12? Oh, please go ahead.
I was just going to say I'm agreeing with Joe, but we're looking at two very unique aspects. The first is the goal of managing crowds. We have to make sure that we are staffed well enough so that any incident that occurs, we can deal with it. And those incidents, I think, are born from use of drugs and alcohol, which is different in the college environment, or like what Greg will share with us in a professional environment. Those are things that are easily purchased through the concessions, but they're not allowed at your high school level games or your junior athletic events. And so people try to bring in alcohol. You have your parents, you have your friends that try to bring those in. And something that Joe pointed out that absolutely is the use of the technology, the detection devices, because I can't remember, I think it's Safer Schools had just put out some data that says that it's like, I think 90% increase in fake use of the firearms and things like that. And that's where those metal detection devices become very important, for people who have concealed carry licenses and bring actual firearms in or fake firearms in. I at the police level used a Garrett detection device. Right now at the high school level, I have Open Gate, but I'm looking at other technology like Evolve and Metricon that have some unique aspects in managing those crowds.
Well, Greg, in the pro environment, you've heard the higher education K through 12 perspective, but where does that translate to on a larger scale events with technology, with communications? How do you manage those types of factors?
Well, I will tell you, if you're going to let Joe cover everything right from the beginning, I mean, Joe, you hit on almost everything that I felt was important. It really resonates, I believe, from high school all the way through. We do get to host the Georgia High School football championships at our stadium, and so I get an opportunity to work with the college, the schools, as well as the colleges that come into our stadium, the high schools that come in for the GHSA. And what I believe in talking with the folks that come through and the challenges we see for the Georgia High School championship is, the importance of a culture of security within the school and within the community and within the administration. My wife is a teacher here in Georgia, and I hear from her, some of the things that permeates throughout the schools. And, what I hear is that the teachers and the administrators can almost tell you in a lot of cases what faction of or what group of people they would expect to have some problems from. They see them every day in the school. They see the challenges. They're the folks that are going to cause most of the problems. So most of the time, if you have the opportunity to have a security awareness at your stadium and at your events, then that kind of permeates out. Joe mentioned what basically we call an incident command center or our stadium operations center, and having those entities in the room. So for us, it ranges from having Joint Terrorism Task Force, FBI, Department of Homeland Security, Atlanta Police Department in a room, along with all the department uh, features in the room. So stadium operations, we have ticketing, we have housekeeping, conversions, all in the same room that's able to communicate and able to react to an emergency situation. Now, I know at a high school, that's probably a difficult thing to set up. That's probably a difficult thing to have. But being able to have that communication amongst that group, amongst those incident command leaders in a room is, I think, critical to have. So if you have in that room, for instance, for GHSA, we have the head of the GHSA in that room. And so we can get from the school resource officers, we can get from the administrators who and what they perceive to be some of the problems. Joe mentioned social media, or I think, you were talking about social media. That's one of the things that's monitored in the room as we go through the event, monitoring social media, because in today's world, people just can't stay off of social media. I don't know how many times we prevented field intrusions because the person is texting out what they're thinking of doing prior to doing it. And we're able to pick up those pieces and respond to it and potentially prevent a field intrusion. And I think Val talked about that as being a potential threat as well, or Joe. And so I think that's overall security awareness and the utilization of a command center would be very valuable. Again, I have resources that maybe not every high school has, but that security culture and getting the buy-in to that incident command system is really, really important.
And Val, I would love to learn. I mean, from a K through 12 environment, do you have a command center? Do you have the resources to establish a command center at the football game?
No, we don't have a football game, but what we did is everything that Greg pointed out. So I'm not going to say stealing, but borrowing from Secret Service. Anytime they have a high-profile individual entering into an environment, a city, they have an advance team that goes out first. They kind of look to see what's going on, and just quickly, that's what our staff does. So we'll have the principal go out, we'll kind of look and do a scan of the fields, what's going to take place. We'll kind of like do a pre evaluation. We have contractual law enforcement that will be part of that, so that we'll know who the security workforce are, who the contractual law enforcement are. We're looking at the field just before the game day so that we can get everything aligned. And we're unique. I have like a great board, so I have to give them a plug. They bought me every piece of good equipment that I could get. From camera trailers to Motorola Ions. So we do have the capability of doing communication. The only thing that we don't have is that actual command center. And but like Greg said, that's probably the best of all worlds. If every high school could get to that, and maybe this our association, the National School Security Directors, they can push that as an agenda item.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, that sounds like a practice that should be translated to the K through 12 environment. I mean, how else would you communicate? I mean, essentially, you could probably create some sort of like a virtual command center, but it's definitely worth exploring, Val. I think. And Joe, on the higher ed side of things, I know I visited the UCF's operations center, all the cameras and all that. Do you employ the type of operations or command center that Greg mentioned?
We do, yes. So at both universities I worked at, It started in both universities with the incident command post being at the stadium itself. So we would have all the agencies that were spoken by Val and Greg, from guest services to athletics to police, from all the represented agencies to your contract security to our own police department, security and emergency management, and then others would come and go. So it started at the ICP, which was just one of the nice booths at the stadium. But then as operations grew and different folks and different resources came into play, both UCF and UF had nice emergency operations centers. And UCF, we built a global security operations center, which was camera centric, right, to monitor all the feeds on campus. And at the University of Florida, before I departed there, I was able to help design a new public safety complex, which was police, emergency management, and security all rolled into one. So the dispatch center was also, a GSOC space, and it had all the technology that we needed. So game day operations at both facilities now are sort of in both places, with police running lead at the ICP at the stadium, and then security emergency management falling back to their EOCs or SOCs to help support large events.
Greg, so working off of Val's prior comment and what Joe mentioned, if you were to recommend what core stakeholders should be involved in that command center, obviously your security staff, law enforcement, you need to have your principal, superintendent. I mean, who would you recommend based on your experience at the pro level?
Yeah, so there's a lot of kind of conversation about whether the command center should be in the stadium or outside. I don't think either one is wrong. What Joe set up there at Central Florida and Florida works well. I have always felt it's great to have it in the stadium. Now, of course, a lot of other law enforcement is going to argue that's a mistake. If there's a situation in the stadium, now your command center gets taken out. Well, I mean, I know every NFL stadium, and I know the Super Bowl has it in the stadium every year. So that's obviously some pretty high profile events, that have the command center inside the stadium, but to have a backup when we do have a backup. But as far as the stakeholders in the room, every entity, security touches every department in some way. Security touches food service. Well, Greg, how does it? Well, because we have to protect the condiment stand. We have to have a process for that to be able to protect, the potential of a threat being put there. We touch communications. We touch every entity in the building. So therefore, we want every entity in the building. And I know a lot of the schools are saying, well, Greg, we just can't do that. And that doesn't make sense for us. But what I would say is think about the key things that's going to go on at your event. Here's what we have. We have communications in the room. We have legal in the room. We have finance in the room. We have human resources in the room. I mean, we have associates involved in stuff, and we have to have human resources come in. We have conversions. We have food service. We have public safety. We have medical. We have Atlanta Police Department. We have the Georgia War Conner Center Police Department. And of course, we have the leaders of the public safety in that room and security. Now, you might say, well, Greg, finance. Let's take finance, for example. Why would finance be in your command center? What's the need for that? Real quick, an example. Had a Monday night or Sunday night football game. We lost power. We were going to not be able to scan. We're a cashless stadium, so we were going to not be able to scan for food. We could still screen people because our security technology like OpenGate and Evolve, didn't need IT for that. We weren't going to be able to scan tickets. So we activated the ERT in the room. We came together and the decision was made. We're going to look at tickets. We're going to visually check them. We're going to let people in after we screen them. Well, what about food? It came up. Well, look around the room and our finance person says, give the food away. Just give it away. We can't scan. We can't take cash. So just give it away tonight. That's what we'll do. Can't give away alcohol, but let's give it away. Now, I will tell you, had finance not been in that room, there's no way I would have made the decision to give away hundreds of thousands of dollars of food at an event. I wouldn't have done that. And so it just shows the importance. Think about your event. and think of every possible thing you can to determine who should be in that room. Going back to what Val said too, you know, getting the entire group, every eye and ear you have to watch out for you. They'll see something, say something, even though you hear it all the time. But if you have a text assist line so that, and you really promote that throughout your events, a test so that people know if I see something that seems unusual, I can text in anonymously and say, hey, I saw this guy suspicious putting a backpack on, trying to head towards the building. He laid it beside an empty pillar, whatever it is, but give your fans and promote the opportunity for them to see something, say something for your event that can go into that command center.
Yeah, I'm just going to have to piggyback off what Greg said. For my school district, we've prescribed to train not only our security workforce, but also our administrative staff and other staff members and volunteers through IC 100, the incident command training through FEMA. And if other school districts aren't doing that, I'm just going to highly recommend it, because it's exactly what Greg's talking about. It's bringing all the people together who need to be there, and what he touched on about the finance person. Even in an incident command center, you have to have a finance person, because if you're going to need other resources, you need to know what those costs and expenses are, because they're the ones that are going to have to pay for them post hoc, and that's University of Illinois for Latin. After the fact.
Well, that's such a great point that you're discussing. I mean, who would have thought that finance has anything to do with safety? And that's thinking outside the box holistically, but everything touches safety. It's not just a specific department. And just want to remind folks, if you have questions for our guests, please hit the Q&A button. Don't use the chat. You can certainly post stuff in the chat, but if you have a question, it'll go right to our guest. We do have a question from Hank Morton, and this ties into, I think, Joe, you were talking about this earlier. How do you utilize mass notification during events, and how do people even sign up or opt in for alerts? And do you have a separate group with your command center, your team?
Yeah, so we did, and Greg actually touched on it a little bit. So mass notification at both universities consisted of both indoor and outdoor speaker systems, text alerting, using the app that was part of the school system. And then as part of the e-tickets, right, everyone's going electronic ticketing now. When you scan that, there's also a lot of information that goes along with code of conduct and who to report incidents to, or medical, or you see someone smoking in the stands, or you name it, right? There's all different ways for communicating. But we use the mass notification system throughout the event, from tailgating through the event itself, through the post-event. So if you're talking about tailgating, we wanted everyone to stop tailgating and make their way to the football stadium during a game. So we used our outdoor speakers, which were usually fixed on buildings, but then we would augment them with mobile units, towable towers that we could set up and be part of that outdoor network for mass notification. And then we would do planned announcements saying, our tailgating is going to be closing down, and we wanted everyone to do the march to the stadium along with the band and get the hype going and get everybody into the game. And then during the game, we'd make announcements. So Florida, you always have to worry about, pop-up thunderstorms and being able to make your patrons aware of inclement weather if it happens suddenly, or if you're tracking a storm as it comes through. So how are you going to make them aware of that? You're going to use your digital signs inside the stadium. You're going to use your speaker systems. You're going to coordinate with your PA announcer to make sure they know, what script to read and when, and have those scripts written out in advance if it's for inclement weather, or if there is a crisis event as opposed to maybe a weather event, knowing what those responses are going to be and having very clear audible text and message board communications that go out. So there's, clear understanding as to what actions you want your visitors and guests to take, and then internal communications as far as what you want your security team, your first responders to do.
And Val, no, I mean, Joe, it's very comprehensive as far as all the different, and that's why applying a multimodal approach, right? You mentioned visual signs, audible, public address, text alerts. I mean, all of the above. You got to cover all your bases, especially with any technology. Not one technology is going to be 100% effective. There's always a risk of an outage or cellular disruption. Val, so we've been very focused on sporting events, but how does like special events at school, like dances or concerts, how do they differ as far as how the event is staffed with security, the types of procedures and protocols you would apply for an outdoor sporting event? How does that differ, like for indoor sporting events or other types of events?
Well, what I've done for our district is when I came in as a security director, and I've only been in place a year and a half, is I immediately implemented what we did in the police force. Anytime that you have a large event, there is an operational plan. Anytime you have certain activity, you do that. And so that's what we have. So the difference is the type of venue it is, sporting events, dance, or whatever. But we base everything upon possible incidents. And so we try to anticipate what would happen. So if I know I have a high school that's having a dance and I know that there's a rivalry between a southern gang culture and a northern gang culture, that our plan is going to be able to guide how many people I'm going to have in staff. Not, usually I work from a perspective of one security officer for every 100 people, because 13% of the population are going to be kind of iffy. 1% are actually going to be problematic. So, and so that's kind of my formula. But if I know that those exterior problems, then I'm going to increase the staff based on what's going on external from the school, because we know that whatever happens outside the school comes into the school. And I would imagine the same thing applies to a big venue like Greg has, or, a college environment like Joe.
Well, what's interesting, and I know somebody mentioned this earlier, but last week or a couple weeks ago, the National Council of School Safety Directors, I think you mentioned this, Val, had a roundtable with members from all across the country, different school safety directors, sharing their experiences with securing events and sporting events with from security. And one of the things that came up, which was very interesting, was social media, like getting ahead of things. Because if you have a gang, a north gang who's potentially going to be in conflict with a south gang, if they're talking about this on social media beforehand, or there's some sort of activity beforehand, you could obviously prepare for that. So that's an aspect that really don't really look at. And now, as far you touched upon the staffing size, depending on the crowd, Greg, do you have any sort of guidance or rule of thumb? I think Val, you said about one person per 100. How does that apply to larger scale events, Greg?
Yeah, well, it's absolutely something I did want to touch on when Val mentioned it. He's doing far and above what the NFPA would say, the National Fire Protection Association, who has a standard for crowd management. And I think what a lot of high schools do, and let me first of all say, I completely understand. I mean, budgets are tight. You don't have a lot of money. You maybe can't hire outside resources. But I think a major failure with a lot of high school major events and smaller events is the proper staffing. So a trained crowd manager is a person who is willing, able, and has been trained in an emergency to help evacuate a facility, a building, an event. Okay, that's a trained crowd manager. And so NFPA says you're supposed to have one trained crowd manager for every 250 people. Now, Val does far above that. He has a police officer or a security person, I'm not sure which, for every 100. So he's far exceeding that. But for us, we use a 1 per 250. Now on police, it's 1 literally per 1,000, but we've supplemented that with private security. So we're 1 per 250 for private security. And that helps us within the standard. Now, look, schools, maybe some folks are listening saying, well, Greg, we can't afford that. I know here in Georgia, it's not uncommon to have a high school football game on Friday night and have 10,000 people at the game. So you start working the numbers, and now you need 40, 50, 60 staff members. The cost of that, I mean, it's really a lot. But what you got to remember is what a trained crowd manager is. And a trained crowd manager can be teachers, coaches, administrators, people who, in an emergency is willing, able, and understands the evacuation procedures and can step in and handle that situation. So 1 per 250 for a trained crowd manager to be able to manage big events. And on small events, it's really it's really the same process. We use the same numbers, and like I said, Val is far exceeding that and is a smart move on his part, and he can apparently with his great board can afford to do that. So good for him.
That's right. Another shout out for the board at Decatur Public Schools. Joe, on the topic of funding and budgeting and expenses, I mean, what are some cost-effective measures that a school can take but have a high impact to secure events?
So one thing we learned very quickly is, there's usually a lot of outdoor cameras in and around your event, right? Hopefully, my security peers out there are doing their diligence and making sure that, are the cameras on? Do they record? Are they of sufficient quality to do the job that they're intended to do? If they're at a main gate where you're doing all your screening and ticket taking and it's a 20-year-old camera, an analog camera, then that might be a budget concern where you forecast a replacement for that camera. In the warm states, Florida, Texas, California, Arizona, the sun just beats up the outdoor domes on cameras. So you might not need a new camera. You might just need a new, clear glass over the dome, and that might be a much lower cost. So I'd say maintenance is a really important consideration, making sure you're looking at everything, making sure it works before your event. And then as the event starts, most video management software systems, you can set up unique views to that event. So configure a page that is for that event with those cameras, indoor, outdoor. And if it's more than one person can manage, make sure that you recruit others. And I think, using students as a resource, if you don't have enough security or police staff to help you with that, train your students and, every set of eyes that can kind of look for suspicious behavior or fights breaking out or a large crowd gathering where one didn't exist as a pop-up crowd, that always helps. But as far as, fiscal planning for capital expenses, there have been, some innovative ways to do security. At both UCF and UF, we did employ drones for using, to augment our security. So you might not have a perspective, or you might have trees blocking camera views, whereas you put an eye in the sky that's versatile to fly around to different parts of campus. Now, if you use a free-flying drone versus a tethered drone, there are different rules for piloting and forward observer and flying over crowds, and you have to be aware of what that consists of. But we had a program at UCF, and at UF we had a program, but we also utilized the local Fire County rescue team that was very proficient at flying drones and actually supported a lot of the events there. Another option is the trailers. You see a lot of the trailers at places like Walmart where they set up, a solar towered or battery powered, generator powered trailer with a telescoping pole that has multiple cameras on it and lighting and speakers. Those are great tools that can be used year round at your venue for different purposes. You could have them with digital signs on them for speed detection or speed monitoring, but then they could, say parking this way, or you can put them right in the midst of all your tailgating. And then you've got a great surveillance platform where you didn't have one previously. And then larger capital upgrades could consist of taking the cameras you already have and augmenting them with, AI type software. Facial recognition, really controversial and still not allowed in a lot of places. But let's face it, we all have people that we know we don't want on campus or in our event. We may have trespassed them before. They may be barred for a particular reason. We know who they are, but you're relying on, maybe 100 cops around the perimeter that don't know this person. You have to hand out all these photos. You put that person's picture in the software, and it can do immediate detection with high level of accuracy. So you can, take preemptive steps before this person causes a problem at all. And I'd encourage people to look at that and maybe explore that as a technology solution. And then, other solutions that can do spatial awareness, again, the crowd detection, or where line queues might be longer and you need another ticketing agent, or concessions get, overwhelmed. You could take those same cameras and put an analytic with some of the cool software that's out there today that can give you immediate alerts. So whether it's the concessions folks, your customer service, or your security police teams can respond appropriately to these. So I'd say that's where you'd want to focus your budget on slight improvements to your current system, but then looking at software that can take your system to the next level.
Bill.
I agree. And I think that something that both Greg and Joe talked about was training staff. The most important strategy is going to be to find those people who are willing, able, making sure that they understand how to effectively use artificial intelligence so that, they can pick out these people who probably have been trespassed. That is going to be by far the only way to keep these special events and sporting events safe and activities.
No doubt. And Jose asked a question and kind of working on that theme. Greg, I'll direct this to you. And we always, in ZeroNow, we talked about this earlier, how tools technology are just tools to enable folks like yourself to be more effective. You cannot keep an eye on every single person in a parking lot. You cannot be looking for firearms, like Jose asked here. Are there Joe mentioned video analytics, facial recognition, video analytics. Are there other technology tools that you employ at Mercedes-Benz Stadium to identify potential threats and allow you to react to those preventatively? Because it's all about prevention. We don't want to have to respond if necessary. If we could get ahead of that.
Yeah, sometimes, and we say often, especially with our screening technology, that we're looking for the bang and the boom. We're looking for those things, those mass kind of casualty things with our screening technology. But really, a threat you could have a crowd management issue that obviously becomes a threat. And so there's so many things to look at. The tools we use. So in our command center, I have at my, right in the room with me, I'm able to monitor social media, and I have a person doing that, monitoring social media, and he's my backup person for if there's a fight or whatever in the stadium. I can turn to him and say, hey, can you bring up section 322? And he is able to bring that up and comes on a screen in front of us, and myself, law enforcement, medical, fire, all in the room watching this situation. So we're monitoring social media. We have a drone detection system that is able to mitigate those potential threat drones. Now, Joe talked about how you can utilize drones in a safe way in public safety, utilizing them. And obviously, I know for the college games and for our NFL games, we have a temporary flight restriction, a TFR. So we know the only drones that should be flying above us is our own drone. So we have a drone detection system. We also have, we're able to monitor the crowds at the gates. We don't do it with what Joe says with some of the analytics that are embedded into the cameras. It's actually something that we're looking at doing. And we don't use the word facial recognition. We use facial authentication because it's not really, for us, our system we use is just authenticating certain features. It's not really taking a picture of it. And so we use that for an expedited ticketing process. We are not currently using that for the detection of guests who have been criminally trespassed from our stadium, but it's something we're moving to. I believe, and Val can probably speak to this, in Illinois, it's highly restricted, I think, to do some of those things with facial recognition or facial authentication. So we're moving slowly in that direction. Obviously, our screening is a big piece of our threat detection that we use Evolve technology. What I love about it, and OpenGate is good as well, and there's others, but what I love about Evolve is, and especially in a school system environment, it allows the administrator or whoever the operator is to focus on the the child, the person entering, and have an interaction with them. And the machine does the work. The machine tells you there's a potential threat. It tells you exactly where that potential threat is, and then it can be mitigated at that point. And so the interaction that we have found between our security staff and our guests coming in with this non-frictionless screening technology has really improved our scores with how a guest feels coming to the game. The old way of empty, come through here, it beeps, it goes off, empty everything out of your pockets. And that whole process, that intrusive process, has actually been made so much better by this screening technology. So Joe mentioned the cameras to be, I think trailers in the parking lot to be able to communicate and send messaging out. He talked about we call it know before you go. All that messaging out to people is a way. It just puts more eyes and ears out there in the stadium looking for the things that can cause you harm. We had two pretty high profile fight incidents at our last two football games, and they really weren't. I mean, we don't have a lot of problems at our stadium, but these are pretty high profile fights that actually was mentioned, one of them on ESPN, which you never want that. You never want to be on ESPN, not as a player, but so, and as we looked at that, what we said to ourselves is there were so many people around watching. How come they didn't just simply text in about this fight? We didn't even know about it in time. And so Joe's, comments about having video that is able to analyze situations and pick up on those things, those are so valuable. Of course, expensive, most are, I think, but it's just some of the tools that are out there that's amazing for us and for schools and for colleges to utilize.
No, that's great, Greg. Thank you. And we have just to let our participants know that we have a lot of questions that came in beforehand and during the program. And after this, if you go to the ZeroNow community, we'll invite Val, Joe, and Greg to comment on those or respond to your questions in the ZeroNow community. We'll just post the questions that were not yet answered. We'll take a couple now, though. We have a couple questions about one from East Cleveland City Schools. They're asking about weapons detection systems that you organizations utilize, and then Jose Figueroa asks about if you are using AI weapon detection systems. So I'll open up to either one of you if you want to address. Because there's visual gun detection using the cameras. You've got your concealed weapons detection. Then you have gunshot detection. So 3 different layers of weapons detection. So Greg, what would you mind sharing what you're employing?
So I mentioned Evolve technology. I won't get into the details of it, but it's definitely something to look at. OpenGate is another good one. I think Val said he uses OpenGate. I don't want to steal his thunder, but those two are the two preeminent in the industry that I think for a school system would really work well. Though I know that Evolve, and I can't speak to OpenGate, uses AI in that. It starts to learn. One of the nuisance alarms we continue to get on our Evolve is eyeglass cases. And so what happens, though, is the more it alerts on those and the more we tag it as an nuisance alarm, the machine actually starts to learn that that's what it is. And over a time frame, will hopefully then not alert on that, which will reduce those number of nuisance alarms we get. So those are the one that I use and one that I would know of, as well in OpenGate. But that's the technology we use in regards to come to threat detection.
Okay. Val.
Yeah, well, we have, like I said, we use Garrett and then we use OpenGate right now. But I am looking at Evolve for unique features, and I am looking at Metricin because, they're not as intimidating, and they might be a more useful tool for like pre-K, kindergarten, those type of things.
So we have another question here from a registrant. And Val, I'll direct this to you. What about homecoming parades? So how do you handle? Is that the Decatur PD that handles that, or how involved is your department with parades that are off campus or leading the campus?
Well, we still manage it. It falls to the principal of the school, the home school that's doing the homecoming. They'll usually be involved in the community from a starting point, but then they'll end up, on campus. So the police department will probably take it from the start location, and then once they hit property, then the police and security workforce will then handle it from that point forward.
We have another question here from an anonymous attendee. So have either of you experienced protests at any of your events? I mean, obviously the last year we've seen a larger incident of that. Joe, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, so being a presidential election season, that seems to be that in the political climate we have right now in the world. Campus communities are seeing an increase in the number of protests. And what we're starting to learn is a lot of those are generated from outside the campus community. So they're not students just trying to speak their mind. They're outsiders that are trying to, take a particular stance on something or create violent situation. So I think schools have changed their somewhat softer posture that they used to have to allow, obviously we have free speech and that will continue on campus communities, but making sure it's done in a civil and appropriate manner. So they're starting to, respond slightly differently to those. When we had the election in 2016 at University of Central Florida, we had both Donald Trump as a candidate and President Obama as a supporter of Hillary campaign on campus, and those brought completely different types of crowds, and this isn't to speak one way or another politically, but Barack Obama at UCF had crowds that stretched well beyond the stadium and the arena where the event was hosted, and it was in a warm weather time, so we had to worry about heat exposure, sun exposure, water, all the things like that. Donald Trump showed up and there were a lot of protests to his attendees that were going there. So it was a much different crowd. We had to set up areas for peaceful protests to occur because really all those people want is a place to be heard. They want to get on TV, on the news. So the news media had them all in one area. It made it convenient and we could track them. And, the other interesting part about that type of event is when you deal with the U.S. Secret Service, if you've never dealt with them, is they'll take a lot of your resources away. They don't want cameras, where the protected asset is going to be, and they'll limit your ability to do what you do day to day for security. The other event too, you just to go back on the last question, you talked about homecoming and parades. We had that on the campuses all the time, whether it was the players and cheerleaders going into the stadium for a game or pep rally or something else. And where you can, now on a campus community, it's much different than through a city for K through 12 or whatnot, but being able to protect that very soft target. And it doesn't necessarily require a lot of capital. You can use things like school buses to protect side streets, certainly other municipal vehicles that you have to set up barricades. So the bad incidents that we've seen happen don't continue to happen against those soft targets.
Greg, did you want to touch upon the protest? Has that been an issue in Atlanta?
Every day. I mean, we're the home to civil rights, and there's not a day that there's not some intelligence related to a potential protest in and around. Obviously, we saw what happened at the CNN building a couple of years ago. Centennial Olympic Park is also a target, and both of those are within several hundred yards of the stadium. And of course, if you have an NFL game on Sunday, you have a cause that you want to get on the news, what better place to go to than an NFL game at 1 o'clock on a Sunday, even if it's outside. But we also have the threat on the inside as well. And the key thing for us has been to make sure that in our weekly intelligence meeting, which we have, or for you guys, maybe that meeting, those pre-event meetings you have leading up, that your police force and the people who would be handling those and managing those crowds know what they're going to do and who's responsible for what. And so for us, I think our police gets a little disturbed with me at times when I ask them, hey, are we prepared for this Israel protest, that's being talked about on social media? It's supposed to happen on Centennial Olympic Park Drive. Yes, Greg, we got that. We have our cut teams available. They've got teams specialized in, removing folks who glue themselves to things. But we also make sure we have those resources inside the building, because obviously the threat of someone coming over a wall, getting on the field is always there. We have a lot of mitigation to prevent that kind of thing, but it still is a threat. And so I think the important thing for us, and what gives me some comfort, is knowing that our police is able and capable and understands what the response will be. If you're in a smaller jurisdiction, you haven't dealt with protests before, that can go bad very quickly. You've seen videos of I don't want to say untrained security, but security in a situation where it's not really a protest, but a field intrusion at the end of the game for a celebration, and some of the negative interactions that occur between them. And it's simply because they haven't been told how they're supposed to handle that. And I think that's what gives me comfort with our police and the handling of protest. And Joe rather hit the nail on the head. You want to provide them an area to go to, but sadly, Joe, our people here in Atlanta don't listen and they don't go to those. And I think they know that the police are not going to arrest them until they start blocking the pathway or causing some other emergency situation that they have to respond to. So as much as we give them a space to be able to, talk about their cause and promote their cause, sadly, a lot of times they just ignore that. So be prepared for that, because if your police say to you, well, we're going to give you this space over here, and they'll just go there, highly likely it may not happen.
No, thanks, Greg. We have time just for one more question, then I'm going to ask each of you just for your final thoughts. And Val, I'll direct this to you. We're talking about all this stuff, the protocols, drones flying overhead, cameras, security personnel. How do you balance the need for tight security with maintaining an enjoyable and welcoming environment for the patrons of an event, families and students?
Well, mine is driven by the school district. It's just the venue, and the safe capacity of the venue is probably how I keep it safe. Whatever fire marshals say is the maximum number that you can have in. Well, then once you subtract that from administrators and staffing, those are all the people that can come in. It doesn't matter about the number of tickets. You try to do that on the front end, so that you just don't have too many people. And then there comes a period of time, like with our football games, our sporting events, that after halftime, we just simply close the gates. It doesn't matter if the venue is completely filled or not. We just shut it off, because we don't want that in and out traffic where people bring things in or people can have access to things that could become a threat.
No, that's great. And we are out of time here. So we're just going to give each of you an opportunity just to share. Joe, start with you. Final thoughts, words of wisdom for our guests today.
Well, we're all faced with budget challenges, but I think we could all agree that, a well thought out plan can help all of us, do security in a much more effective way. So planning is free. Planning just takes your time, and don't do it in a vacuum. Don't do it alone. Everyone that's involved in an event should have, a say in the planning and the execution of that. So, give people the tools to help you prepare. Measure how well you did during the event, and then do an after action review or hot wash where you can say, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, and what can we improve on, and what requires funding to make it better, right? So use those people as resources, and then, a group of people can get things done more effectively than an individual can. And then one other thing we talked about before was a lot of you may be familiar with it's called NCS4. And I think a lot of you are probably members. If you're not, look it up. It's not a paid advertisement. I'm not part of the organization anymore, but I was when I was in higher ed. It's the National Center for Spectator Sports Safety and Security. It's run out of the University of Southern Mississippi, and they have great free resources for K through 12, higher ed, and professional sports venues to help. They give you great templates. If you don't know where to start, that's a great place to turn.
Oh, thank you for bringing that resource up. And by the way, we will have takeaways and resources in the community for this webinar page as well. Greg, final thoughts, words of wisdom for our participants today.
Joe, thanks for that advertisement for NCS4. I'm actually co-chair of the CSSP, the Certified Sports Security Professional Committee. It's something for those to look into if you're interested in that. It's a similar certification as is CPP and PSP, and there's great resources there. I would say basically use your resources that you have and create a security culture. And that starts with your public safety officials and your administrators. Let it be known that the things that you will not allow and you're not going to tolerate. And then let that be known to the community, the folks coming in, that these are the parameters you have. And if you get outside of those parameters, there's going to be repercussions, a criminal trespass. You're not going to be allowed to do those things. And then finally, give those resources, those 1,500, 2,000, 10,000 guests who are coming to your event or football game or whatever it is, give them the resources to communicate and report, to see something and say something, as corny as it sounds, to keep hearing it over and over. Give them the resources, because that gives you the ability to respond to those situations in a timely manner. So to me, that creation of a security culture is the most important thing.
And a security culture costs $0, and that's the thing. And we hear that, and that's a common theme we hear across all of these over the last several years. I mean, it starts with culture. It's an intangible. Val, final thoughts from you, sir.
I'm just going to reiterate the goal of security for schools, for large events, colleges, and university is to manage crowds and prevent incidents which would lead or could lead to significant injuries or deaths.
Awesome. Thanks, Val. And just want to remind folks, our next conversation is November 19th. And we're going to be discussing emerging threats in K through 12 schools, looking at new security challenges that have been emerging. There's a number of different things with AI and obviously social media, but what is next? Cyber and other factors. So we'll be discussing that next month. So you'll be able to register for that a little bit later. But I just want to remind everyone, go back to the community after this. In about 30 minutes, we'll have your questions posted in the community. This webinar, this replay will be available by next Tuesday, and we will connect with you and upcoming events, and you can access your resources. Thank you very much, Greg, Joe, and Val. Glad you could join us, and we'll see you all soon. Take care. Thanks.